Bueno, hola a todos.
Hello everyone. My name is José Clastornik and I'm the Executive Director of AGESIC, and I ate a lot of bread if you were present during the previous presentation. I'm going to talk about the construction of digital nations. Could you please close the door? It's too noisy outside. The construction of digital nations should first start with the definition of digital nations, and taking the country of reference, Estonia. Well, in Estonia they say everything is digital except for marriage and divorce, because we want to see the face of those who get married and those who divorce. In the logic of a digital nation, there is a word which is everything, 100%, that everything is digital. This gentleman, Thomas Hendrik Ills, was the president of Estonia, who during his 2 administrations turned Estonia into the country he is today. He is very well known. He was here last year and he made a speech, and he is very much respected for what he has achieved. And I took one of the phrases of his speech. He says, countries may be great to the extent that they are digitally powerful. Estonia is a country that is half of the size of Uruguay, with 1.5 million inhabitants, but it's still a big country. It's a country of reference, and it's great in some things, for example, with regard to virtual population. They are allowing people to become virtual citizens of the country, citizens who can open companies without living physically in the country. Companies that are based in this country that is member of the EU and therefore become European companies. Barbara Ubaldi, who maybe will send a presentation for this event, is the Director of Digital Government of the OECD, and she says 2 things that I would like to mention here. Firstly, that this everything we are talking about, the digital nation, cannot be conceived without a digital government. We cannot think of a digital nation without the digital government. And secondly, if I tried to define digital government, well, I would say that the definition changes. And let me take this as an example of the change in the concept of digital government. The maturity model that you see on the screen, it's Gardner's model, shows the various dimensions of the concept of digital government. And I'll give you an example. Think of a Ministry of Public Health in any country, could be Uruguay. What is the most important work of the directors? The traditional job is, for example, to accredit laboratories or institutions, or the quality control of various hospitals, or work with those who finance the health services. Now, e-government is the automation of these processes of accreditation or authorization and follow-up, all of these things. Historically, the people of the Ministry of Public Health had a lot of information about quality related to the functioning of hospitals or social works or the name that they receive in the US. And this information was hidden in the Ministry of Public Health for its own use. At a certain point, this information was published in a completely open format so that different enterprises would be able to take this data. An NGO did it and created a program that allowed these citizens to see the same information that the organizations had. And citizens were thus empowered to make decisions about which health service they would use according to the average time for get a medical appointment or the price of medications. And 2 years ago, in the open government event, this NGO won the World Prize as the best application and use of open data in a government. So there is a logic of openness, getting out of the silo and starting to work together. And then, at the end of the spectrum, you have another example, smart government. There is a lot of information, the one that the Ministry of Public Health has, for example, that can be put together with the one extracted from social networks for an analysis that may be intelligent and productive, and it can get to the big data. And the Ministry of Public Health of Sao Paulo in Brazil did exactly that in order to fight Zika when there was an outbreak of this disease, and the information was coming from the social networks. So the logic of the digital governments comes from the traditional use of IT in a ministry, such as the Ministry of Public Health, to the management of data in a context of open data, to intelligent management of information using big data and artificial intelligence. And in between, there will be many steps or many different cases, as you see on the screen. This is the first thing I wanted to show you. The second thing is the ecosystem, which Nicolas already mentioned this morning. When this question opens up, it stops being the question of a ministry or a certain body. It starts being part of an ecosystem, and not only an IT ecosystem. It's an ecosystem that contains the industry, the academia, the hospitals, the universities, and these things have different IT levels. And the ecosystem is the one that prevails in the digital government, and in some way we try to create the right conditions so that the ecosystem may flourish. If I had the time, I could tell you what happens with the indicators. At the beginning, we had the indicators of the project's office, and now we are hiring sociologists and economists because the logic associated to the digital government is a completely different logic. It's a logic that measures user satisfaction. What's Uruguay position? Vincenzo, who is the Director of Digital Government of the United Nations, published the biannual indicator of the United Nations a few weeks ago, and Uruguay is a leader in Latin America and the Caribbean for the third consecutive year. In this specific case, Uruguay is among the countries that are more developed according to the UN ranking with regard to digital government. We have many good indicators in Uruguay. And the one that was more successful in the social networks was to be with Estonia, Korea, Israel, New Zealand, and then Canada also was invited in the D7 group. So with the power of doing, everything can be fine, and I don't need to be here. I don't know whether you managed to see this tweet that belongs to the civil registry of Uruguay that was closed for 3 days. The system was working, digital procedures were working, but the building was disconnected from the cloud server and was not repaired for 3 days. It says third day without IT system. And I could tell you about other examples. People tell me about things that are not working. And of course, not everything is doing fine. There are many things that are still work in progress. The power of doing does not mean that everything is done. On the contrary, it's a challenge, and there are many things to do. And all this introduction brings me to the challenge and the opportunities we all have vis-a-vis this new challenge. The first challenge is completeness. For example, for an oncological patient, it is possible now to have all the information on IT support, and this information can be available in any place where there is an oncological hospital. That is to say that all of the medical protocols are digitalized. I'm referring to cancer because of its incidence, and in particular lung cancer or ovarian cancer. But we have to continue working on this project, and the data also are very important. The quality of the information given by the doctors has to be the right one, and the data have to be accurate. So this is an example of a system that was created and was completed and is in use. Another example is the electronic file, which is one of the most important things in public administration. IT files solve a lot of things, but what happens with interoperability of files? An electronic file will be taken where the right software was there, and it would be printed, scanned, and uploaded elsewhere in another organization. An electronic file may be in a ministry, but may be not in every division of the ministry. It may be in a place that acts as the distribution center for the ministry, but maybe it's not in use or not available elsewhere. And if we see this as a document, the electronic file is one of the 4 documents that have been defined by the public administration, and I don't want to talk about good practices and in this regard. These 2 examples are inside the square that says efficient government and administration and management, and the oncological software is in the square that talks about the transformation of services. When we try to visualize all of the policies of the digital government, well, in our case, we have 6 large areas that are divided into others. There are 19 in all, and they contain 58 initiatives and more than 125 projects. and the projects change every year. They are redefined. Obviously, I don't have the time to tell you about these projects, but not only the whole thing is important, but also it's important to have a comprehensive vision. In colors, we have the data, and for the data, we had to think of a regulatory framework, data protection, etc. And with regard to digital architecture, we are working on standards associated to data, spatial data infrastructure, health, and in the future we will start on education. It is necessary to establish certain basic conditions. Is the information adequate? If it's not geographically referenced, we are working on a project for spatial data in order to have an official and complete database which is very accurate, 30 centimeters in rural areas and 10 centimeters in urban areas, that will allow us to locate geographically any event, and this will help us when we're working with big data, but we should have an holistic and a comprehensive vision in every case. Then sustainability. The example I gave you about the civil registry falls within this sustainability. We need sustainability within the ecosystem, and this is something difficult to achieve in the public sector. But I'll give you two examples to talk about evolution. Firstly, digital identity. The backbone of the digital government is a digital identity. A few weeks ago, we had an event with the Brazilian candidates to presidency in order to present the concept of digital identity. In the government, the public sector, we need to regulate so that things have a legal value, unlike the private sector. So we have to regulate the basic infrastructure. We created a regulatory authority, and we continue. We created certification authorities. Now we have 3. Habitat, the National Identification Body, and the Postal Service. And these authorities can produce the certification. And now we have changed also the logic of signatures. It's not only signature, it's also authentication and identity. We are working on an ecosystem that allows for different levels of security associated to the identification of the person. And we have a single sign-on. And finally, we are trying to achieve recognition between countries. We are making tests with Finland and Spain and Brazil so as to achieve it as soon as possible. We want to close the concept of ecosystem with these different levels of access. We are working around vertical axis, and the first provider will have a signature and an authentication in the cloud. And with regard to digital identity, we were able to produce an ID card with a chip that allows for identification of citizens in a massive way. So we are producing all of these things, and we are continuing making progress, and everything is advancing. When you come in or out, you may notice that out of the country, you may notice that there is a scanner that recognizes the face when you use your passport or your ID card. And these scanners are in a controlled environment. No one can hack the system. And the passport can be scanned. And the only thing that is required is that the scanner is more efficient than the person at the sitting on the desk. It would be different if you were at home and you were trying facial or biometric recognition. And we need standards so that mutual recognition between countries functions. Now, what we know is that all this is going to happen. In Brazil, there is an application for facial recognition. Same thing in Buenos Aires. We don't have standards that are mutual to these countries, but Uruguay probably has the best process associated to giving an identity card to a person. In 12 minutes and a half, a person can get his or her identity card with a PIN, etc. What will happen with the apps that have or that use facial recognition? Or what will happen when you have to renew an ID card? Well, we have to think of how we will be renewing these cards in the future. Cybersecurity. I'm trying to tell you a lot of things in very little time. We cannot think of a digital country without cybersecurity. So the first thing we did was to create a national center of response to IT incidents. If there is a security problem, we are informed. We try to control it, to do the forensic analysis, so as to devise how far the damage went and who was responsible. We started working then in vertical response centers, health sector, financial sector, banking sector, and with the Ceibal project, we signed one for the education sector. We have one with the Ministry of Defense. We have people who are specialized in the analysis of cybersecurity. At the Ministry of Defense, for example, we analyze what would happen if a radar was hacked. And we have models and audits to work in each case. We have a generic model, and now we have specialized model for the health sector, for the financial sector, etc. I was saying that we work on incidents that have been reported, and I'm talking about some hundreds of incidents. But now we are working on a tool that will allow us to detect intrusion before the incident happens. So we went from some 100 data to millions of data. We have artificial intelligence tools that allow us to work on this from the security center. It's called SOC, and it is operated jointly with the industry. The enterprises specialized on cybersecurity, and also with those who are in charge of cybersecurity in various sectors, in the banks, in the health sector, etc., so as to bring them in and build an ecosystem that may feed back on our work. Nowadays, we also have an operation with the IDB, and we intend to create with the Inter-American Development Bank a analysis laboratory that will analyze trends and will give us intelligent tools so as to investigate behavior patterns. So the second challenge was the continuity of the evolution. And the third challenge is innovation. The context changes every day, and we have to break our paradigms. We have artificial intelligence without which we may not exist. And think about the blockchain. The government's activity is an activity of recording mostly. We handle registries, and if we have a technology that will allow us to manage the information with enhanced security and deploy it better, well, this is part of the ABC of the work that we do at the government. But we also need to understand that there are trends and fashions. You put blockchain in the title of a presentation and you fill up the room. And I have made up a name for projects that should not be part of the blockchain, but now they include the name blockchain in the title to make them more attractive. So in this regard, 2 comments. When you make a project, you make a project. It's not a hackathon. I did something, me too, etc. You have to understand it, you have to enrich it, and we have to understand it in your own context, in the context in which it's being used. With regard to robotics, for example, or the automation capacity, thanks to robotics or artificial intelligence, changes the costs of things. And it's not the same one that is done once a week than once a day. So we need to have a certain logic in the use of each technology. And also, we have to understand that sometimes we have to wait until standards are approved. Otherwise, we may not reach our target. For example, in Estonia, they were telling us that their platform in the public health was based on something similar to a blockchain. Conceptually, it's a blockchain, but actually doesn't reach the technological standard of a blockchain.
De modo que hay 3 cosas para cerrar que quería decir. Una nación digital.
So finally, in building a digital nation, when we talk about 100%, we have to know that this is a target that has not been reached because the number of proceedings per year will increase and the workload will increase too. The second aspect is that this is not just a question of the government. It's something that pertains to the ecosystem. For the government, it's difficult to innovate in general. But today, when we speak about digital government, we are not talking about something isolated. We are talking about a whole, an ecosystem that needs to work as an ecosystem so that the national health system works as such. And finally, there is an opportunity so that this one of these challenges can be met. And this in the context of Uruguay and also in our world context. The government chooses the opportunity of testing many things and doing a lot of things. New developments, testing with the government a lot of ideas. That is the challenge. How things get into the ecosystem. But in the case of Uruguay, things are somewhat different. If you look at how Korea or Estonia sell, as well as other countries that have been leaders, they have 15 reasons to explain why the country is number one, and then they show the product they want to sell. They sell leadership, they sell trust, they sell the possibility of doing business with those who are at the forefront. So for the Uruguayans, the opportunity that is now open is twofold. The opportunity of seeing in every challenge an opportunity, and also of doing things in a country where the things that are being done can be duplicated. For example, now we have a loan from the IDB, but these loans have been spread to other countries such as Paraguay and Bahamas and Peru based on Uruguay's example. So my question to you all is, where are we, where are you with regard to the construction of a digital nation, and what we will be doing from our respective places? Thank you very much.